Home Green Home. It's taking it where the people use it. The people, we are the people. We've been talking about affordable housing as if we're not living in affordable housing. It's relative. And there's things we need as human beings. I live in an affordable house. We can talk about the urban poor, and we can talk about why they are the urban poor. We'll see a bit more of that. And this is also based on the World Green Building Week, which will be in September as well. A few of the things I'll talk about today: the green building movement itself in Kenya, and touch about Africa. Great stuff happening in South Africa, as I've just had. Imperative for green building certifications, and the materials themselves. So, budding Africa's green building movement. There are some countries are set up already, and the Green Building Councils are members of the World Green Building Council. But there's a whole list of other countries, and anyone who's talking about affordable housing, it's replicable, scalable across Africa. So I'm talking on behalf of Africa. We're looking at Botswana, Cameroon, DCR, Ivory Coast, Libya, Nigeria, Senegal, Sudan, Tunisia, Uganda, and Ethiopia came on board the other day as well. So they're setting up their Green Building Council. But why are they doing this? Why is everyone going for Green Building Councils? When we talk about Green Building Councils, remember where we are with our building codes. I think some of us will know what we're building to in Kenya and when they're dated. So the next time you see the Minister of Housing, ask him about the building code and if it links to climate change. So the Green Building Society in Kenya itself, what do? We're independent, non-profit, and we had to add this in, non-political. It's about the people, not politics. We're a member-based organization, so you'll see I can see Apex Steel, and a few other members as well. We're always knocking on the door, and we live on the membership fees, so that's where we get the cash to do this. What do? We're leading the transformation of the built environment in Kenya towards environmentally sustainable buildings. And I'll show you some photos of what we're doing, business as usual, because we're here in Upper Hill, very nice building that we're sitting in, but what we're talking about, what's happening on the streets, is quite different. How do we do it? Advocacy, knocking on the government door ever since 2011, going through the different governments. Education, certification of green buildings. And I'd just like to add on advocacy. It's not just local advocacy. So when we talk about climate change, Center of Parties in France, COP21, we're involved in that as well. The financiers who are sitting here, we will talk to you outside of Kenya and request that you actually put in a request for responsible development in the funding that's being given to our developers. It's not just a matter of business as usual. So we have a lot of structural and imposed barriers in Africa, but we have the greatest opportunity as well. Sustainable development goals, they come and go. UN is actually here, and I've seen UN Habitat, our partners as well. We've got the Vision 2030 in Kenya that's working for us. References climate resilience. We don't want to create slums of the future. Green economy strategy. I'll be quite surprised if a lot of the developers actually have read these documents of what the plan is, the Big Four agenda. Why do we have a Big Four agenda? How does it link with climate change? How do we adopt? How do we deal with 80 million youth who are going to be living in cities in Africa by 2050? The other side of it, yes, the stories you see on TV, poverty, iniquity, peace, and insecurity. Education has come up quite a bit in a lot of the African countries, so we've made that a priority as well. Advocacy and the perceived cost of going green. How many people here think green building is expensive? I'll see you later. See me over lunch. But at the same time, I hope you garner some things from here, because in Kenya, around the equator, in Africa, we have the best weather. And this is why the guys from Europe and the rest of the world, when it's winter, they come here. Why do they come here? Why don't we take advantage of our position, especially on the passive design? Use what is free, God-given, first of all, before we talk about innovation and technologies. So this is a graph from IFC Edge. I noted we had IFC here. They did a study just to see what is the growth on green building, what is happening in this nascent, budding, membership-based organization element of green buildings. The only thing you need to remember is the curve is going up. So we don't have seed funding, etc. This is just from our members. And what's happening on the other side? The costs are going down. You can't compare the cost of solar, for example, from 10, 15 years ago to now. The other side of it is adaptation. If you rely on our utility power, sorry for you, there's generators as well. So people are going for solar. So adaptation is kind of matching up in Africa. It's the same with water. If you rely on the utility, we have rationing. You have 3 days of water, you tank it, then you have to buy water in some time. So we say, why don't you just build sustainable from the beginning? Then there's risk mitigation. If Elizabeth and her team do their work well, the laws, the codes should actually be changed ASAP. So they'll catch up with the buildings. So something that happened was there's the regulation for solar hot water. In Kenya, we have a regulation that every building should have solar hot water on the roof. The ones that didn't have to go back and do it. So if you didn't put it in the first place, you have to get the guys up on your roof to do the piping, etc. So those risk elements we have to consider. Then again, there's the naysayers. What if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? All that positivity, energy independence, preserve rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, and then what's the point? So the bottom line is the benefits are for us anyway, even before we talk about the cost benefits, the health benefits, etc. But what are we doing? As soon as you pick a building code, it's outdated. When was it written? So we always have to think about where we're going as Africa. I'll talk about Africa now. What is happening with our climate? Who's giving us the climatic information? Because today it's not flooding, but it might flood in 5, 10 years because of the changing weather patterns. So please consider that as well whenever we're saying, yes, it's built to the minimum codes. They're outdated. Impact of poor planning on our ecosystems. So all of us say, okay, what are we doing now? We're eating our greens. Have you driven around Upper Hill? Have a look around where we are. It was very green and loads of trees, but we're in buildings now. There was no reason why we couldn't have considered some spaces for us to get out here at lunchtime and have a bit of greenery. You'll see how you feel in the area after 2 days. There's the exhaustion in the body. Your eyes probably are watering in this room, etc. We eat our greens, but we're not supposed to be eating our greens in the ecosystem. So business as usual. This is a quick trip to Isli on the left-hand side. And I hope the developer for this building is not here. So when we talk about affordable housing, there's this perception that this is what we're planning to build. This is what we're going to put our kids in the future. This is what we're getting funding for. Because this is business as usual. This is what's going up. But this has to change. And that's why the Kenya Green Building Society is actually pushing for a green building policy. Because we've had developers say, if it's not law, why do it? So the ones who've actually done it have the vision. And why are we subjecting our people to that in Africa? In this day and age, we have all the technology, information, skills to actually build green. So, what do they address? On the macro level, urban planning, resource management, which are challenges in East Africa. So urban governance also links to decentralized finance. We spent the last 3 years at least talking about sustainable finance. We've gone to AFD, I know they're in the room, we've gone to IFC, we've gone to basically any lenders to Kenya to look for where the challenge is. But the fund comes, it's with Treasury or with NEMA. How does it get to you and you and you, even if it says it has to be a responsible investment? Why haven't we created frameworks to decentralize that? Kenya has counties. Why doesn't the funding go to counties so that it's actually felt on the ground? So you'll see the nice words, yes, saying we have so many, 300 million from World Bank to Kenya, for example. But how do you access it? Slums and informal settlements, we have the chance not to have any more of those in the future. Access to services, that's been said, water and sanitation, energy, waste, urban ecosystem management. But then there's greenwashing. We say we're going to build one green building in Nairobi, but then you're building 4,000 affordable homes somewhere else that are nowhere near green. And when I talk about green, I'm talking about certified green, because your green might not be my green, mine could be taller than yours. And there's systems to actually benchmark what green is. This is where we are with Africa, and this is sourced from Google. We haven't built much of the infrastructure, so we have the opportunity to do it right. Look at Kenya. Desertification is visible. So even when you talk about 10% of tree cover increased by 2022, it's very little to what we need to do. But it starts with cities. So we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about individual buildings, individual developers, but we need to take a step back and look at cities, because in 2020, 20 million electric vehicles should be on the road, 70% of the people will be living in cities, consumption of energy is 80% from cities, CO2 emission, 75%, and raw materials, 75%. And that's why we have invited material manufacturers to be members of these green building councils as well. Let's not forget smart cities. It sounds nice, etc., but some people think that affordable housing doesn't need to have ICT. How much is a SIM card from Safaricom or Airtel? How much is a Wi-Fi network? Why don't we connect this and get the data we need to move forward? Affordable housing will never be affordable if it's far from everything that matters. So the infrastructure has to come in. We have to lock ourselves in the room with the governments that are involved in it and not pass on the cost to the owners of the building or the tenants. Otherwise, it is not going to be affordable. So speaking on their behalf, I would rather move into a house that will be affordable when I live in it. I'm not going to buy water while I have taps there. I'm not going to buy electricity while I have lights on during the day while the sun is out. Risk mitigation, just to focus on a few items before we release you for lunch. Rental income decrease, that's what's going to happen. Future value of real estate assets, because if we're doing our jobs right and educating the Kenyan citizen, they shouldn't move into those buildings I showed earlier. Regulatory risks. If, once again, we're doing our jobs right, this Climate Act 2016, Kenya is the first one that has actually released an act on climate action. The same is going to happen in Africa, and those buildings will be obsolete, and I'd rather not own one of those buildings. This is about the air we're breathing today. We're going to breathe 12 kilograms of air today, so that's the bottom of the pyramid. It matters where we are and the space we're in. So, quickly passing through, we know about passive design, our great-grandparents did it, our parents did it, and then we go and do this. I said I'll show this because it doesn't make sense. Yet we are asking people to use daylight, natural ventilation. So if you're the developer with a nice balcony, and I'd like IHS to note this as well in Kenya, this is not what we're calling green building. This is not what we're calling affordable housing. Because these guys will have to go to hospital because this is the environment we've created. They spend more money. So 60% of the people in Kenyatta National Hospital down the road are actually in there because of communicable diseases because of our environment. Typhoid, cholera, because we haven't looked at water and sanitation. So when we talk about green building, it's not just the building itself, it's the built environment. And this is business as usual. New, fantastic, affordable housing, in quotes, we haven't considered about solid or liquid waste management. So all this is covered in the green building approach. We talked about water. What are we doing about water? Most of the times we'll say we're getting boreholes. So every building gets a borehole. And at the end of it, our aquifer levels drop. I mentioned about green building certifications. We have Green Star, contextualized from South Africa. We have LEED, and we have EDGE. For the affordable housing, the discussion has steered towards EDGE, which is a World Bank IFC tool, which within 20 minutes you can know what your return on investment is, what your energy savings are, water, etc. Green building materials, why don't we just put labels on them? If you're buying water, if you're buying a car, you look at the spec. why don't we put specs of materials, especially the green ones, on the materials themselves? Why don't we put a label on affordable housing, on the performance of the housing, so that if I'm moving in, I'll know how much I'm going to spend? So just to finalize, in doing all these things I've talked about, we have the SDGs. And I hope these SDGs will talk to the financiers, because it's the international language. We meet 80% of the SDGs by doing sustainable, affordable housing. And that's why I implore the president, the ministers, not to just call it affordable housing, but to call it sustainable, affordable housing, because we don't want to create slums of the future. Thank you very much.